Welcome. I am Michael Aiken, president of Link Strategic Partners. We are back for another edition of the Link Changemaker series. We started these Changemaker series as a way to bring diverse community leaders together from around the world to discuss some of the issues of today, some of the most relevant topics we can be discussing. So far, we've talked about leadership, healthcare, equity, belonging, youth leadership, women leadership. We've had so many really good discussions in this space, and I'm really excited about today's. We're going to be talking today about the power of convening, and we're going to be doing that through a global lens. Bringing the right people together in the right ways with the right questions and the right framework can be remarkable. It can also be really hard. So we're going to learn from some of the best minds I found in this space to really think through what convening can look like and the power of bringing people together and opening up dialogue for learning new ideas and progress. I have the pleasure today to be joined by one of Link's very own community leaders, Christian Klansky, who's going to serve as my co-host today. And he's going to take it from here and introduce our panelists. Take it away, Christian.
Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. This is actually my first time joining a Changemaker series. So if my nerves show, I guess the only risk is that this will be permanently committed to the virtual halls of history. Quick bit about me. My name is Christian Klansky, and as Michael said, I'm proud to serve as Director of Community Engagement here at Link Strategic Partners. And prior to joining Link, I spent 16 years in roles that really sought to unleash the awesome power of the nonprofit and philanthropic sectors. So really thinking about what's possible when we conceive of collective power. And in every instance in my career, our best opportunities for actually changing the world, not just talking, but actually improving the world in meaningful, lasting ways, whether at the hyperlocal level or at the global, those were discovered when people came together. So my sense is that the very act of convening is something that creates the conditions for completely unexpected ideas to suddenly emerge. The sorts of things that might not be possible or really wouldn't be possible without the power of convening. And I think that's really the spirit that motivates our work here at Link. So all this is to say, I couldn't be more excited for this specific conversation. And I guess the question is, why are we having this conversation today? And so quick stat, there are 8.1 billion people on this planet. You all know that. We have one world to share with each other. I know that sounds like a cliche, but if you think about this, there are 8.1 billion people in the world. The median age of people alive today is about 30. So that means at this minute, as you're watching this, there are about 240 billion years of lived experience that we have the opportunity to learn from, And so that's why we're talking about the power of convening. What happens when we bring those years of experience together in different configurations? And it's not just the power of convening, but the power of global convening. So I'm really excited about the folks that we get to speak with today, learn with today. They represent 3 continents. We couldn't get anybody from Antarctica. We got a cold reception there. But it is my pleasure to welcome Sbu Mayeni, co-founder and CEO of the Embeleco Foundation in South Africa. My colleague Jamal Holtz, who leads equity, belonging, and public affairs here at Link Strategic Partners. And he's really instrumental in leading complex dialogues and discussions that help build a sense of belonging within communities and organizations. Josh Lasky, a distinguished Link alumnus and director of sustainability at George Washington University. And Nigel Murphy, who is the former deputy leader of the Manchester City Council in the United Kingdom. Thank you all for joining us here today. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you. Turn it back to Michael.
I appreciated all of that, Christian, including the rather corny dad joke in there. The Antarctica joke was good. And I want to remind our fellow panelists, we're on screen the full time. So if you don't laugh at his jokes, he's going to watch this later and just be devastated. So I want to put that out there for everybody. Christian did a really good job introducing the topic. I love those stats. And I want to give each of you an opportunity as we get started to go a bit deeper in your introduction. Tell us about your work. Tell us about your roles. Tell us about how you approach that work. And I'm going to start with our friend in South Africa, Sbu. I would love to know a little bit more about the Embeleco Foundation, what it does, and your role in that. Take it away.
Okay, so I started Embeleco Foundation 13 years ago, and it was influenced by many people that came to our community from all over the world to help address a community health problem through agriculture and community health. And so that influenced our education, me and my siblings, because my parents could tap into this network of people to help us get scholarships and better education. So when my twin sister and I got to university, we realized that we needed to pay it forward to the next generation of children, especially at the time because there was a huge HIV and AIDS impact that had killed. At the time, there was no treatment, so a lot of our peers had died together with their partners, which meant that they'd left children with grandparents. And so we started off as a scholarship program that took these talented but vulnerable and often children to boarding schools. And over the past 13 years, we've grown this into not just a scholarship program, but an after school program, as well as a school. We've started our own blended school in partnership with the University of Cape Town, and also an opportunity to create jobs for these talented youth who struggle to get jobs when they, finish university. So it is, in a way, an opportunity to create an end-to-end support and create an economy. And our intention is really to ensure that these talented kids become global, sustainable citizens.
That's amazing. How many children have you served over Embeleco's history so far?
So we've supported over 1,000 kids. We currently have close to 100 graduates. So these are from engineers to medical doctors to accountants. And we currently host about 500 kids at a time through our scholarship after school program as well as our own school.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I'll have lots more questions in just a bit, but let's go from South Africa up to the United Kingdom and bring in our friend Nigel. Nigel, tell us a little bit about you and your journey.
Well, I'm not sure how I follow that one, to be absolutely honest. It's absolutely amazing to hear what's going on in a completely different part of the world. I've been really fortunate. I had 15 years as a councillor in Manchester. Manchester is one of the largest cities in England. And of that, 10 years was on the cabinet. So actually they're responsible for quite a lot of different areas, from regeneration to waste and recycling. But I also worked on a regional basis as well for the Greater Manchester area, which people may have heard of, where I was on the police and crime panel and also looking at the whole waste and recycling. So actually how we can use resources better and make sure people are doing it. So the whole bit of looking for change is how you bring communities with you. And I would say, as any elected politician should know, if you don't bring the community with you, you're not going to end up as an elected politician for much longer. But I made the choice to step down rather than being booted out by the electorate. So hopefully I was listening in the right times, in the right ways.
That's great, Nigel. And I've had the real opportunity to work with you over the years. And I'm just so impressed in how you build coalitions and bring people together for the greater good. Jamal, real pleasure to have you here. I get to work with you every day. You're such a dear colleague and a true executive at this firm. It's just really great to have you here. I would love for you to explain what equity, belonging, and public affairs is in terms of your role. Then I also know you serve in a variety of community capacities as well, from boards to elected positions, etc. So can you weave that together for us?
Yeah, I'll try to do it and follow the 5 B's. The 5 B's, they say, be brief, brother, be brief. So as introduction should be slim. But no, I get the honor of working and serving within the organization like Link Strategic Partners. That's about sort of building communities, right? It's about convening communities all across the country. So for me, whether it is in my professional day-to-day job or in my civic work, I often like to say, I like to get into good trouble. I like to take on some of the world's most complex problems and so sort of some of our community most complex problems. But ultimately, my goal is thinking about how do we bring people to the table to where we can get to the solution, right? And in my work at Link, I am often charged with or engaged in projects where building consensus through collaboration and conversation is a key factor and finding solutions to some of the world's most very complex problems. Right. So as you mentioned, I lead the firm's equity, belonging, and public affairs portfolio. And I'm often working in environments and on projects where I'm asked to either help shift organizational culture through change management processes and convening discussions that sort of help build a sense of belonging. But the power in all of that is that it requires conversation. It requires convening around sort of meeting people at different entry points on what they believe and how they come to these conversations. And as you mentioned, sort of in my civic work and capacity outside of Link, that I think all ties back to the work is I also get to serve on 6 different organizational boards and nonprofits where it's about bringing communities together. And I serve as the president of the DC Young Democrats, where I ran on the principle on sort of getting more young people engaged and bringing more young people to the table. I think often in these roles, the thing that we always think about is, how do we just get people to the solution, right? We always say, how do we get more young people to vote? Well, we meet people where they are based on their level of understanding. So my focus is in this role is convening the over 80,000 young people that I represent under the age of 36 in DC, and starting with them from a conversation and convening those communities first, and then asking them to get to the solution. So I'm honored to be a part of this conversation and talk a little bit about that.
I appreciate it, Jamal. And as we go forward today, I also know you've done a lot of work in the statehood space, the statehood movement around Washington, D.C. and representation for residents here, which has required really intentional coalition building. You don't do that in a one-sided way. The only way this progresses is if you build coalitions around it. So excited to unpack all of that. And then last, but certainly not least, excited to bring Josh in here. Josh is a Link alum. He did great work for us here at Link and really built out our sustainable communities portfolio. Now he's bringing his talents to the George Washington University in a very big and pretty high profile role. So Josh, talk to us a little bit about what that looks like for you.
Thanks, Michael. I am absolutely humbled to be part of the Changemakers discussion and have this conversation about convening. So thank you for inviting me. I am back at GW, believe it or not, right? So I'm a 2-time alum, like many other folks at Link coming out of that institution. And I'm excited to be doing the work at GW. GW is a major university, a major research university, I should say, located in Washington, D.C. For those that don't know, it's one of the largest landowners in D.C., also one of the largest employers in D.C. We have 25,000 students currently enrolled and about 6,000 staff and faculty that work at the institution. So it's in many ways a city within the city of Washington. My role at the institution is to manage the implementation of our sustainability commitments. And part of the reason why I took this job and I was excited to do so was because those are some ambitious, bold commitments that the university's made. So we're aiming to become carbon neutral by 2030, which is just around the corner. We've eliminated single-use plastics from the university. We have committed to achieve zero waste, which is an 80% diversion rate from landfill. We're also committed to divest our endowment from fossil fuel holdings and achieve a platinum rating within the sustainability tracking assessment and rating system, which is sort of like a lead type of framework, if you're familiar with that system, but for higher ed. So a comprehensive set of performance targets across academics, research, engagement, and operations at GW. Like so many others leading strategic change efforts, I've been given tons of responsibility, but very little authority and very little resources. So that basically means that convening becomes an absolutely critical tool for accomplishing anything. And so I'm excited to dive into that topic today and talk about how I've been able to leverage convening to the benefit of advancing sustainability at GW. So really excited to be here. Thanks.
That's awesome, Josh. Thanks for that. I'm going to toss back to Christian to lead us forward.
All right. So let's get into the conversation, right? Each of you has worked in very different fields in different parts of the world. And my sense is one of the beautiful things about that diversity of experience is that each of you has a unique perspective on the world. So you're convening around specific issues, politics, responsibilities, geographies, professional roles, age groups. And to that end, I don't want to assume that convening has a universal meaning, right? It's a word you can look up in the dictionary and get a definition, but I think the actual animating spirit behind it really matters based on the context of what you're trying to accomplish and where you are in the world. So the first question for our conversation, like, what does convening mean to you? How might you describe it to somebody? What's its power and purpose? I know a couple questions there. So I want to start with Josh. And then as we have this conversation, please feel free to react to each other, jump in. We really want this to be a conversation. But Josh, what does convening mean to you?
Thanks, Christian. I think maybe because I'm going to go first, I want to talk about conditions for making convening work. So conditions are everything, I think, and are a great starting point to think about what you're trying to accomplish and what you're trying to get done. But for me, convening begins with the right kind of invitation. People want to feel welcomed. They want to feel comfortable. They want to feel valued. If something feels extractive, if it feels like people are just being used, your convening is not going to get you where you need to be. And so setting yourself up with the right invitation is really, really important. I think you also need to be really clear about your expectations for participation, right? What is your ask of the people that you're trying to convene? How do they fit into a larger picture, and how are they going to contribute to that? I also think it's really important to blend the strategic with the tactical. What is the long-term vision, but also what are the steps along the way on that journey? And that's the difference between, unloading the burden of addressing the climate crisis on people you're convening versus having them have a discussion around, decarbonizing or limiting carbon emissions from one single building, let's say. I also think it's not about, bringing people together is not about celebrating a single shared objective. It's about celebrating a diversity of perspectives. So to me, that means creating the space for what I call, or what's been called, generative conflict. You don't automatically have, this sort of monolithic view of, among your participants that you're bringing together. And really, you shouldn't. The power of convening comes from the power of different perspectives. So I think if you've got that condition of people feeling welcome, of people feeling comfortable and valued, they're going to be willing to engage in that kind of productive conflict, right? And out of that conflict yields compromise. It yields new ideas that were never brought in to that space to begin with. But that can be really, really powerful. But you've got to get people comfortable and ready to have that generative dialogue. And then the last thing I'll sort of offer in this vein is I'm really into creating conditions that allow people to be moved. Okay. So I think a lot of our problems, whether it's our politics or it's, thinking about the future of our communities and looking at a local level at things like development, they come from coming in with a mindset and not having any flexibility. But if you get people to a place where they're willing to absorb new perspectives, to process what they're hearing, to learn, and potentially to change, you've done something incredible, right? So give people permission to be moved as they come together, and set them up to be, just very, very encouraged to listen, to understand, to learn, and then maybe leave that convening with something new, whether it's a new story or a perspective or an idea they're going to take forward, or maybe a new action. So between the invitation, the celebration of diversity, the setting people up to be moved, I think all of those conditions will make for really, really powerful convenings.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. I love that. First of all, it sounds like you should run for office. But second, I had this brilliant advisor in college, David Cuman Kim, and to the point of conditions, that one thing that really stuck with me, of many things, but the one thing that I think about probably multiple times every single day, he had this phrase: "What are the conditions for the possibility of blank?" So thinking about the conditions, not how do I solve this problem, but how do I set the conditions to even make this possible? And so I really love the idea of thinking about conditions and the power of bringing people together in the right conditions.
Can I add one thing here,
Yes,
Christian?
please.
Because Josh, I loved that framing, and I saw lots of nodding. There was a thing that I've reflected on a lot, and it said, "Are you arguing to win, or are you arguing to learn?" Right? And it was framed in the spirit of dialogue. If we enter everything with the need to win the debate or the argument, we've taken away all of the incentive to try and learn from another perspective as we move forward. And I think that's so interesting. We spend a lot of time leading community engagements, often around really, really hard topics. And Jamal and I have talked about this condition setting a lot. It's a very popular thing as a facilitator to declare that this is going to be a safe space. Can we all agree that this is going to be a safe space? And even in that declaration, there's a power imbalance, because I'm declaring as the facilitator that you all now feel safe. That doesn't create any agency. So we tend to talk about, let's create a brave space where this is probably going to be uncomfortable at points, and we have to have some conditions for that to happen in a safe way. But no one can declare if you are safe or not in this discussion. So let's not set that false kind of dichotomy. But I think that condition setting is so important, and I'm glad you brought it in here.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And so, Nigel, I want to hear your thoughts on convening, but also maybe you could speak a little bit with your experience about the idea of generative conflict, because I suspect that's something that you have a lot of thoughts on.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting. I didn't hear what Josh said. I think it could be the same on this side of the pond as on yours as to how we get that done. And it's people often say that people don't like change, and I don't think it's they don't like change. They're just weary of, skeptical of change. And how do we start that journey for people to come on it with us? And when you look at it at different communities, what is the problem? What is the objection when you're bringing two sides together? There's a lot in common, and it's often the similar fears that they've got for each other. So we've touched on work in the past, which we did for some of our students' areas. When we bottled it down, it was fear of crime. The regular community were worried about crime from students, and the students were worried about crime because of being in an area which had a higher crime rate. So what could we do to look at the crime areas? We could do that to other areas within the city. In Manchester, when we look at regeneration, people are wanting houses, they're wanting places for their children or their grandchildren to live. Well, the only way you can do that is by building them. So what style of housing can we build that's going to be acceptable to both sides? And I think the bit of the whole convening and coming together is, can we start the conversation as early as possible? If people feel empowered by a process at the early stage, there's more chance of people coming with you on that. And that's when compromise can be made, because people will have an affection for an old piece of land that's there that's now become a bit of a playground, because actually the problem is we haven't got any playground for the children to play in. But if we could have a space where children could play, and we could put some accommodation that's suitable on a different plot of land, can we pull them together? So I think it's try not to be too prescriptive to start off with of what the issue is, and actually listen to both sides, because there's a lot there in common. So immigration is a big problem, or conceived to be a big problem in many parts of the world and certainly in the country. What's it down to? It's lack of housing, lack of healthcare, lack of education. If we can address some of those problems, we can address it's actually not a problem with immigration, because it can actually solve some of the issues we have there. So it's having that conversation to start off with. Clean air, Josh made me think about that. We've got huge issues over here with people saying they want to have clean air. As soon as you ask them to do something about it themselves, to do something about clean air, it's somebody else's problem. So how do we bring it through and say, we're not... So you've got either push and pull with taxation or other areas. If we can pull people with us because it's actually the change they want to see, how can we get that done? So I think it's listening is the key to any convening or engagement. And if we can do that in the right proportion and give people that space to listen to each other, which is really, really vital.
That's a great answer. Yeah, you can't achieve anything if you're not listening to what other people are saying. Spoo, you have a really interesting set of folks that you're working with. So young people have their entire lives ahead of them, and often they're not tied down by an understanding of what doesn't work. So there's this really exciting moment of imagination about the future. What does convening look like for young people?
Convening for young people, especially in a community where they haven't been exposed to anything except waking up and going to school and coming back home, it is more about being led by someone towards something different. And so for me, I will talk about convening from different perspectives. So I explained earlier that my siblings and I left our community and we learned so much and realized that we needed to pay it forward because we got so much exposure and we wanted the same for them. So when I decided this was my purpose, I firstly had to look at how do I find solutions for them before I can even convene them. So I had to again step out of my community and go to different pockets of communities. And, like where I met Michael, it was a place where people had convened. And I felt like there were solutions that I needed to bring back to my community. So, and I've tapped into the United States quite a bit. I'm an Eisenhower Fellow, part of the Aspen Institute, different conventions where people convened. And I learned so much that I was able to package into a model that I brought back to my community. So, in a way, this has helped my community from parents to schools that I work with to kids themselves to embrace what I bring back to them because, in a way, they respect it because it comes from different networks where people convene. It's not just me just thumb sucking that these are potential solutions, and not necessarily also me saying these are perfect solutions, but these are solutions that different people from all over the globe have come together from their own communities, and we think this is what will work for them, and it does work. And also for me, convening is also not just me convening people in my community, is being able to tap into different platforms and networks like this one. The kids will get to watch this session, this series, and it's a new um, opportunity for them to learn more. So for me, this is convening that will go back to my community and be able to impact thousands of people, not just because I tell them to, but they get exposed to all of you guys through convening that we're doing today.
That's great, Swoo. So that really builds on, if you think about Josh talking about the idea of setting the right conditions, Nigel talking about the importance of having a process from the outset, sorry. And you've added this really interesting dynamic, which is leadership, right? You can't just bring people together and expect magic to happen. You need leaders in every conversation. You need to listen to everybody, but you need leaders to help move the conversation forward. And one of the most effective leaders I know is my colleague, Jamal Holtz. And you all know this about Jamal, but you cannot go anywhere in Washington, D.C. without Jamal knowing a handful of people. You can't even get out of his car without him knowing the first person he sees on the street. So, Jamal, I want to hear your thoughts broadly about convening, but also specifically about how you bring the right people together.
Yeah, and I'll just say one thing. When I think about going back to the point Josh made around sort of like the structure we set to convene, I often think of convening as almost like restorative justice, right? It's that opportunity where we don't automatically just resort to the decision. We automatically resort to the conversation first, right? And I think about the work that we do together and sort of the practice we've built at the firm and sort of how we always tell people that the power of storytelling leads to inclusion. It's that people prefer to hear stories from their peers and more than they prefer to hear stories from their leaders, right? Because we have to sort of create the space for peers, just people. We have to create the space for people to share their lived experience because that's often where people often find commonalities, right? So when we talk about sort of course, you made the joke about knowing everybody, but like we don't know people or understand or build relationships with people just by randomly seeing them on the street. We build those relationships with people because we randomly see them on the street and then we have the conversation with them, right? And sort of when I think about as we built out this practice of equity, belonging, and public affairs, You may note that I don't say the word inclusion, right? Because I often want us to push beyond inclusion when we're talking about convening, right? Because it is very different for us to include someone in the conversation versus making people feel like they belong within the conversation, right? So as we set those structures, as we set those norms, as we convene, we have to do more than just making people feel like they're included because it's a conversation, but make people feel like they belong. Um, so as I think about sort of like how do I define convening, it's often how do I define what belonging means for people. What does it look like to bring people together to ensure that what we're talking about, how we're talking about it, and where we're talking about it, all creates a sense of belonging within that conversation. So that's sort of my unique perspective and approach to it. It's a restorative justice approach.
That's great, Jamal. Thank you. So, we've sort of set the foundation for how to successfully convene and thought about the different elements of what it means to convene. Um, I want to turn it over to Michael to think about the outcomes of convening and what the impact might be.
Absolutely. And there, I know what we're talking about today, right? We picked the topic together. And even with that, I am 4 pages of notes in because I'm learning so much as this is going. And my mind is going in so many different directions here. Spoo, I'm going to start with you to really pick up on some of what you highlighted. First, and we can take this offline, but I think we should do a Changemaker series that features and is produced by your young people. I think it'd be fun to really create the agency and the space for them to lead a Changemaker session, pick the topic, facilitate it, and then we can put it out through our platform. I think that would be really cool. But I want to talk about, wouldn't that be fun? I think we should do that. That would be great. You talked about where we first met, and I remember it very vividly. We met at the Aspen Institute at a Socrates seminar convening. I think it was out in the Meadows, their open space, at a barbecue, I think is where we first really connected. I was so struck there, and I continue to be struck at how you have created and leveraged a global network of supporters for work that you are then deploying in the most local or hyper-local of fashion. And so I'm interested when we talk about convenings on kind of the power of agency and how have you been able to bring global support, global funders, other interest into this space, but do it in a way that you are still able to deploy it to meet local needs, which you and your young people are going to know better than anyone else. And sometimes I found that supporters might not fully understand that you know it better than everyone else. So can you talk to me a little bit about how convening can be extractive and how you found a way to really deploy it in an effective way?
For me, I think it's also that research aspect of it because you can't necessarily, like, I couldn't go to the Socrates program and be like, I'll take whatever and take it back home. So it is being able to connect with people, but pick things that are really going to be relevant to my community. And also, it's not then just plugging it in. Like I always say that our kids kind of dictate what we do. So when I go out to convene, is because they've challenged me for a solution that we don't have on the ground. And then I start, like Michael, again, you will know, like I'm constantly calling and emailing for solutions, for guidance to the next person that can help. So it's almost like a research thing. You identify a need and you know that you do not have a solution. So you go and convene people or to a place where people are already convened for solutions. But it doesn't mean that you need to take them, you can still then customize them to be relevant to our environment. And also,
I love that.
For me, it's allowing kids, like I was saying, you customizing, but you're also allowing kids to feel like they're in the lead in terms of what works for them and what doesn't work for them. So it doesn't mean that if I've brought it to the environment, it has to work for them. We're constantly chopping and changing our programming. And I think it's also made our partners to be aware that we can change anytime and they need to change with us. And I think that's been amazing also with the partnerships that we have, is that, they can't give us something that's, cast and set in stone. We constantly evolving, and they need to work with us to constantly change whatever it is that we are working on.
Spoo, I really appreciate that, and I think it dovetails nicely into the pivot I want to make over to Nigel, going back to the UK for a little bit. Nigel, in the same way that I remember when I first met Spoo, I believe we met when I was at a conference for UKTGA or ITGA or one of those convenings, those global convenings that was looking at bringing higher education and local communities together, kind of the town and the gown, which is often one of those places that there's some tension, right? There's this conflict often between communities and the communities and universities that are in them, and there's so much convening that happens to bring those together. I've seen you as a political leader bring together local businesses with local residents, community with institutions, civic with political. How do you do that in a way that understands these are going to be complicated, and we might not always land in a place of agreement, but hopefully we've moved the ball forward. So when we pick back up, we're starting at a more evolved place. How have you done that kind of over so many years so successfully? Any tips for us around that?
I think it's still a work in progress, because I don't think you ever finish that job, because the communities change every year on year. So I suppose it's setting down some common expectations and trying to build a trust between two communities. And it is often two communities. You've got people, certainly with a student population, coming in for 2 or 3 years into an area, and they forget that people have lived there for generations. Equally, some of the people that lived there forgot how it was like when they were students. So it's trying to remind people of where it is. It's also reminding what students can bring to a town or to a city. They're bringing the nighttime economy that's there, which has its pros and cons for some communities, but they wouldn't be there unless the student population were there. The restaurants wouldn't be there. Actually, there wouldn't be places to go and shop as much as well, because it's reminding what the benefits are of bringing in thousands of people. As you know, we talked about Washington, the numbers there which Josh was talking about before. That area of Washington will be completely different. The bars wouldn't be there. The takeaways wouldn't be there. The supermarkets wouldn't be there. And the jobs for local people, because it's also remembering that the universities are big employers as well. So I think it's setting the ground rules, trying to build some trust between them, and realizing that some of it is shared experience. So whether it is the noise when people are coming back at night after probably having too many in one of those local bars, that affects students as well as affecting local people, because some people have got exams the next morning or are studying. So it's bringing that together. But it's also looking at that wider picture and saying, we don't have all the solutions. As a council, when I was there standing as a councillor, I didn't have all the solutions. I might have my ideas, but other people might have the solutions. It's being willing to listen and say, what can you bring to the table? Because we've got to go in, I think someone said before, about an open mind. And that's the hardest bit, because we all do go back in with a preconceived idea, whether that be residents, whether that be businesses, whether that be students, whether that be politicians or council employees. We want to be there to actually say, hold on, let's listen. And just because it didn't work 10 years ago or 15 years ago, that doesn't mean it might not work now, because technology's changed, which brings different ideas that can come to that table in the same way. But it is building that trust, and it can work with student population. It can work with lots of other things as well. You know, in Manchester, we had a great program called The Radical, which was looking at extremism. And when I was over, I went to George Washington University. We looked at extremism and some of the work that was going on there, and it's great because we're a radical city. We were the birthplace of the Peterloo Massacre. We did the Industrial Revolution. We had the right for women to vote. All radical ideas which are now commonplace. So why can't we talk through the ideas in that safe space, an open space, a trusted space, but it doesn't mean it can't be a thoughtful space. And I think it's trying to not restrain ideas that are coming from people who are affected day to day.
I so appreciate that, and this just dovetails so nicely into a pivot over to Josh and kind of talking about the role of universities here in creating these conditions. When we're putting together a community engagement process, we'll often ask those that we're working to convene, let's define up front what type of process this is. Are we building a collaborative process, or are we building a consensus-based process? And we can do both effectively. And I have no strong feelings that one is necessarily better than the other, but we have to define that up front. Are we wanting a process where we don't move to the next step until we get 100% agreement on the step we're on? Or are we building a process where we acknowledge up front that full agreement may not be possible or even preferable, but we need to run a process in such a way that everyone knows how their input was used, we can prove that their input was used, and we're keeping everyone abreast of how we got to the next step every step of the way. But if we don't define that up front, we're kind of leading into a process where the expectations aren't defined, and that doesn't lead to a successful process. Josh, when you and I have talked about this over many years in many different contexts, I remember very vividly in our old office in the basement of the Urban League, you drawing on a whiteboard, I think it was a campsite, and you drew a bunch of tents and you drew a campfire in the middle. And I remember you saying, let's look at convening this way. If everyone pitches their tent and then stays in it, that's very different than if you've got your tent and you can go back to your tent for safety anytime you need, but the magic happens at the campfire when we all come out and sit and talk together. And that visual has been so resonant to me. And I'm wondering how you use that, or how that may have evolved as you're trying to organize around huge goals like decarbonization, et cetera.
That is such a great question, and I think I'm so glad that image sort of resonated with you. And I think the question for me is continuously, how do you get people out of their tent? How do you get them closer to the fire? And how do you get them in a space where there's real opportunity for possibility? Christian, like you said, so I'm on a college campus, and so. This may seem strange, but I've actually really, really prioritized fun and whimsy in a lot of the things that I do. I don't think there's a better way to get students out and in a place where they're ready to engage than thinking about what's going to be exciting and what's going to be cool and what's going to be kind of tapping into their interests. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Well, let me zoom out for a second. At GW, we've got folks that they're passionate about climate, they're passionate about sustainability. They'll show up, they'll follow, they'll engage whenever we need them. I think the larger part of our community are folks that are interested in sustainability, but much more casually. And so they'll engage when it's convenient, or if it's aligned with their personal or professional goals. Those are the folks that I think we're really trying to engage hardest. We're really trying to convene most actively. So a couple of quick examples for you to show how we're getting people out of their tents and into sort of a shared space. One is that, I hear more and more from young people, first year students in particular, that they want to be able to compost. I think composting is one of those sustainability efforts that's, you touch food multiple times a day, you're going to have some measure of food waste, most likely, but how do you be responsible about it? So for us, I'm trying to recognize the fact that people want to compost, but they really don't want to go too far out of their way. And so how do we meet them where they are, literally? So we've introduced sort of a multi-point initiative around composting that involves introducing composting in every single one of the residence halls and every one of the eateries at GW. We've hired a team of students, 7 students. We call them our compost educators. And they manage compost operations at more than 50 events a year, where they're bringing biodegradable liners and a compost bin and actually helping people sort on site at those events, touching thousands of people a year. And then they host a central collection in Kogan Plaza, which is like our main, gathering space on campus 6 days a week. And we're really, and that's where they collect, compost. They actually weigh it. They take, contact information, and we try to track it as close as we can. And then we're also piloting composting at residence hall. So, it is so much easier when we show up and support composting with that kind of effort, rather than saying, here's a bin in this one place, come do it if you care. So really meeting people where they are, making it super convenient, and allowing them to sort of convene at multiple points in multiple locations at multiple times is the right way to go. The other thing that I want to throw out there is another really fun example. Students love thrifting. They love, reuse fashion, and they love secondhand stuff, and they love getting it for free. So we've married a couple of initiatives at GW to help bring people together around those areas. So one is at the end of every spring semester, we do something called Green Move Out. And this is basically where we set up collection bins in every single one of our 21 residence halls and allow people to dump clothing, household goods, bedding, non-perishable food. Last year, we collected 57,000 pounds of items. Most of that is going to local community partners like Bread for the City or A Wider Circle or Habitat for Humanity that serve individuals and families in need. But this year, we decided to collect and keep about 6,000 pounds of it and do a little bit of this modeling of circular economy right here on campus. So we prioritize dorm essentials, things like organizers, little shelving units, shower caddies, kitchenware, and some clothing. And then, we stored it over the summer. And then during move in, we basically set up a pop-up reuse store where we put, all that stuff out and allowed people to take it back. And so we're sort of, bridging this space between the moment when people want to throw everything away and the moment where they want to go to Target and Walmart and, CVS to buy it all again and, offering it at no cost. So we had 700 people come through that event. We cleared 6,000 pounds of inventory in 90 minutes. And more than 3/4 of our attendees said that they found a useful item, even within that 90-minute span. So, those kinds of opportunities to convene people around the fun, the stuff that, allows them to shop for free. They save money. We're diverting stuff from landfill. We're checking a lot of boxes, and, we're creating a culture around sustainability on campus, really without asking people to actively do something, right? We're meeting them where they are, both literally and figuratively, in terms of those passions, those interests, and we get something really cool out of it. So that's how I'm trying to get people out to the campfire a little bit more. It's just making it too enticing not to be out there and to engage.
Those are great examples. And having worked for nearly a decade in higher education, I'm just thinking through the number of people you had to convince that storing it over the summer and putting it back out in the fall was worth the time and effort. So well done, my friend. That's really great work. Jamal, I'm going to wrap up here with you and then toss back to Christian. And I want to ask you a little bit about this concept of belonging and where that fits in convening. And I'm doing this really intentionally. I have seen you be cast into a front of room role in some of the toughest discussions that there are to have, right? Often people don't hire us to convene something if it's easy. They hire us because they have to figure it out. And so I've been in discussions with you around reimagining public safety. We have led discussions around redrawing school system boundaries. These are issues that have a lot of history, a lot of resonance, a lot of emotion, very appropriately so built into them. And I've seen you just have a really great way of in no way downplaying the importance of the issue, but recasting the discussion in a way that allows for opportunity and forward movement. And let me give one example of this, and then I'd love for you to respond to this and unpack it even more. When you introduced yourself, you talked about your title, starting with belonging. And so in many other spaces, the belonging work we do, it's called diversity, equity, inclusion, or DEIA or JEDI. There's a lot of different terms for it. And what we started finding was that the terminology and the baggage around the terminology was often getting in the way of the work that needed to be done. And so Jamal really leaned into this concept of belonging, that at the end of the day, diversity, equity, inclusion are all in service of ensuring that people belong. They feel like they belong, they truly belong, and they're operating from that place of security. I'd love to ask you to unpack that a little bit and kind of what the power of reframing or framing is in these convening discussions.
Yeah, no, those are great points. And you pointed out to some of the examples of very complex dialogues that we've been leading over the months. And the one thing I'll add to it is that all of those dialogues and conversations and issues, the one thing that they all have is personal stories, is that everyone show up with their unique personal story and perspective. The one word I want to emphasize in all of this is authenticity, right? When we create the space for people to be authentic and be themselves and be personal, then we create the space for people to learn from one another. And that goes back to what I was talking about earlier on how the power of storytelling builds inclusion and belonging, right? And I want to give two examples real quick about sort of how we sort of insert and sort of show up as our most authentic selves in these conversations, and why is this so important? I talked about earlier my role as serving as the president of the Young Democrats, and I am no way, shape, or form want this conversation to be political or whatnot. But I do think I think back to this conversation, that organization, of sort of a group that was called Youth Conservatism. How do we revive it? And just off of that alone, that typically people who identify as one or the other party don't typically mesh well in sort of having the conversation. I think the one thing we fail to do often is have the conversation, right? It's create the space for the conversation. So I showed up to that conversation knowing that I was going to be the only one that was completely opposite in that conversation. And in that conversation, there was a topic about healthcare. And everyone's sentiments in the room was the Affordable Care Act was one of the worst things that have happened to our country. And for me, I thought back to the reasons why I got into activism and convening to begin with. It was during in 2014 when President Obama made the call to action to sort of call your senator and sort of call your representatives and ask them to vote for the Affordable Care Act. And that was important to me and important to many other millions of Americans across the country. And in that moment, I resorted to my personal story and why I became an advocate for this, right? So I raised my hand and I spoke. And I think everyone expected sort of to fight into this fire. And the first thing I said, I know that what I'm about to say is probably going to change the perspective of all of you all. And then it's probably not what you hope that I say. But I said, I led with my personal story. I said that I grew up with a family who every woman in my family literally has passed away to breast cancer because they didn't have preventative care coverage. I grew up with a mom who was underinsured or uninsured. I grew up showing up to a hospital one day and needing treatment and was denied treatment in an emergency room when I was 7 years old. So when we talk about what this Affordable Care Act meant for me, it was personal. And that wasn't just for me, it was for millions of other Americans all across the country. And in that moment, everyone's perspective shift on what the impact of that piece of legislation was, because we led with a personal anecdote. We led with a personal story. We created the space for people to be authentic and for them to be themselves, right? So when we talk about what does it mean to sort of like convene and sort of create the space of belonging, it's about letting people show up as their most authentic selves and giving people that space to be able to share their personal stories. Because that's how we get to the solution, whether if it's in issues we see in our communities or issues we're seeing in our workplace. Create the space that allows for people to have those conversations and then hope for the solution on the outcome.
Jamal, so powerful, and I think exactly the right place to round out this discussion, right? We talk about policy and perspectives, but if we just create that space for personal stories and frame it in a way that can move people forward, there's a center, I think it's at UNC, run by a guy named Kurt Gray, and he runs an institute called the Center for the Study of Moral Understanding. And what I always take away from this is even in the issues that are dividing us most, if you boil it down to the underpinnings of why people have the beliefs they do, there's often a shared moral understanding of why we have the beliefs, even though they express themselves completely differently. So when we're leading a dialogue around reimagining public safety, for example, or we're leading a dialogue around gun violence, instead of asking people to start by declaring their position, because once you've declared your position, it's really hard to move from that, lean into storytelling. So I don't ask, are you pro or anti-guns? Are you pro or anti-law enforcement? We ask questions like, give me the first memory you have of a firearm. Give us the first memory you have of your interaction with law enforcement, because those foundational stories are likely what helped lead to the beliefs you carry today. And if we can understand those, we have some shot at getting to find some threads of progress there. So I'm so glad you brought that in.
Yeah. And Michael, just to add quickly, even in that conversation, we asked everyone, like the ultimate goal for everyone was safety, right? Was to create a more safe and vibrant community. And when you ask everybody how do they define safety, right? It's completely different for everyone. Safety for someone who may be a young Black man in this community may be safety very different than someone who's grown up their entire life in this community, right? So when we talk about sort of having these conversations, is also understanding the words that we use, the definitions we bring to these conversations are often different, and we have to sort of create the space for people to bring their own definition to that, like you said, Michael.
I love that. Christian, I'm going to give you the absolutely impossible task of trying to wrap us up here. So back to you,
boy.
sir.
Oh boy. Well, I'm going to pass that task off to our panelists here. But, I understand the irony of talking about ending a conversation focused on convening, right? Because unless there's one person left in the world, the work of convening never ends. It's easy, I think, to feel like once you have convened, you've accomplished something. But the truth is, convening is an ongoing process. It's a fundamentally human skill. So as we wrap up here, I want to ask each of you for one thing. The frame for this conversation is the importance of global convening, right? But global convening doesn't happen unless people know how to successfully convene, period. So we talked a lot about our professional experiences, but convening is just as important when you're thinking about family, friends, neighbors. It grows from there. So I want to ask each of you, and I'm going to start with Jamal. So Jamal, you have about 10 seconds here to think about this, and everybody else has a little bit longer. But what's just one action that you believe our viewers need to take in order to be successful conveners? Right. So I really want to focus on the action of convening. And if people walk away from this conversation remembering one thing from each of you about what they need to do, what would that be?
Yeah, yeah, and 10 seconds, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. No, but I want to just say everything is a social construct, right? Everything is human driven. So when we talk about convening, it's ensuring that it's human centric first. So my charge and my action and my challenge to listeners and viewers is step and be comfortable being uncomfortable, and be comfortable stepping into dialogues that you believe in, and leading those discussions as well.
That's great, Jamal. Discomfort is a privilege, actually, in many cases. Sabu, how about you? What's your one thought? Call to action.
My call to action would be to take a moment and find your purpose. Because we can all convene, but if you don't have an agenda and a purpose, it's pointless. So find your purpose and step out there and make sure that you live it, and the world will be a better place.
I love it. Josh, how about you?
I think my ask is that folks consider some questions as they think about convening, and these are sort of, just to reiterate, parts of our conversation already. We've established that conditions matter. So are you inviting people in a way that makes them feel welcome, comfortable, valued? Are you letting them know how you're going to benefit and how our community is going to benefit from their contributions as they're convened? Are you actively creating the space for generative conflict? Are you giving people permission to be moved and not just to show up and try to win? Are you making it convenient, fun, cost-effective for them to engage and to convene? If not, how can you demonstrate that you're effectively removing as many of those barriers to participate in your convening? So many questions, not just one. So apologies for breaking the rules, but I think stopping and pausing to ask those questions, I think, will yield some great process and some great results as you think about bringing people together.
Wonderful. Nigel, how about you?
I'm going to just do a little reflection on, in my early part of life, I grew up with Northern Ireland, where each week you'd had a terrorist attack of some type. Over my shoulder is a copy of the Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Accord, which is where the community decided to work together. And I think last time I saw Michael in the United Kingdom, or certainly one of the times, we were over in Belfast. Belfast is now a welcoming city. benefiting from the communities working together. I was over there last year, and it shows what can be done. So it's the art of the possible. I think it's remembering what is possible, because we can't live in some of the dark wood. I'm going to finish with a quote, and it's from a sad story, because it's from a legislator in the UK that got killed during the Brexit referendum that was here, and she got murdered by right-wing extremism. But in her maiden speech that she'd made in Parliament, she used the words, "We have more in common than what divides us." I think that's what we've got to remember all the way through. So we can remember what the real purpose is, we can actually really get something done.
That's amazing. So find comfort in discomfort. Find your purpose. Stop, pause, and ask questions, and then really internalize the fact that we have more in common than what divides us. I think those together are really powerful. And if I'm following the script here, I'm supposed to thank you all and end, but I'd actually like to ask Michael to have the final word here and share his thoughts on convening, because he's truly the most gifted convener that I know.
I appreciate that, Christian. This hour has flown by, and it could have been 3 hours. This was just the start. For those who are watching, I would ask that if something has resonated with you, please feel free to share this with your networks. Also, feel free to drop your thoughts. If you're following this on a social media channel, drop your thoughts in, drop your questions in. In that spirit of convening, we want to learn from each other. We are convening in a moment where the world seems to be getting darker. But discussions like this help me understand that the path forward is bright if we all work on that together. And I want to take that spirit into the sharing of this into the world. Let's learn from each other. Let's keep having the convenings, because there's lots of hope out there if we lean into it. Thank you for joining us for another Changemaker series. Thank you to our incredible panelists. And Christian, you're a phenomenal co-facilitator, my friend. Thank you for what you did today. Appreciate you all being here. Bye-bye.